How long did you spend on this book?
Half of my adult life.
The story of Cher does not begin with glitter, feathers, or #1 hits. It begins with silence, the kind of silence that comes from an empty room, a father who walked away, and a mother torn between survival and sacrifice. Before the world called her a goddess, she was just a little girl named Cherylyn Sarkisian, growing up in a broken home, hiding her hunger with imagination. Cher was born in 1946 in El Centro, California, to a mother who was barely an adult herself. Georgia Holt was just 19, still chasing her own dreams of being a singer, when she gave birth to a child who would one day outshine them all. Cher's father, John Sarkisian, was of Armenian descent, charming but unreliable, a man in and out of her life like a storm that never settled. He disappeared when she was young, leaving behind a shadow that would shape her sense of love, loss, and abandonment for the rest of her life. Her childhood was marked not by stability, but by constant motion. Her mother struggled financially, moving the family from one place to another, sometimes leaving Cher in the care of relatives when money ran out. Poverty became a constant companion, and shame a silent teacher. Cher once admitted she felt like the poor girl in school, the one who wore clothes that never quite fit, the one who always knew she was different. But difference would become her greatest weapon. As a child, Cher felt like an outsider not just because of poverty, but because of her mind. She wrestled with dyslexia, struggling to read the words her classmates seemed to understand so easily. But instead of shrinking, she built worlds in her imagination. She would stare into mirrors and create characters, dream up fantasies, and sing songs to herself when the silence of abandonment became too heavy. Her mother's boyfriends, some kind and some cruel, came and went. The revolving door of men in her life deepened her mistrust, but also taught her resilience. She learned that love could vanish, that people could leave, and that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. By the time she was a teenager, Cher already knew she wasn't going to follow the rules. At 16, she dropped out of high school. She didn't see herself in classrooms or textbooks. She saw herself on stages. With her dark hair, deep eyes, and a voice that didn't sound like anyone else's, she knew she had something, even if the world didn't see it yet. Her rebellion wasn't just against school, but against the fate of becoming invisible. She wanted more. She craved more. She often said she never saw herself as beautiful, too exotic for the blonde, blue-eyed standard of Hollywood. But what she lacked in fitting in, she doubled in charisma. Los Angeles became her new home, a city of neon lights and broken dreams. But for Cher, it was a battlefield. She worked as a club dancer, sang backup vocals, and hustled her way into rooms where she didn't belong. She was fearless, almost reckless, because fear had already lived inside her since childhood. Poverty and abandonment had stripped her of illusions. What more could the world take from her? And then, at 16, fate walked in, wearing long hair, a quirky smile, and a voice that would harmonize with hers into immortality. His name was Sonny Bono. At the time, Sonny wasn't a star, not even close. He was working with Phil Spector, one of the most powerful music producers in the world, a man whose walls of sound would define the 60s. Sonny was nearly 12 years older than Cher, and in him, she saw both safety and possibility. He offered her something no one else ever had: belief. He believed in her voice, in her uniqueness, in the way she could hold a stage even when she doubted herself. Cher moved in with Sonny, first as a roommate, then as something more. He was her anchor in a world that felt chaotic. Her mentor, her partner, her first great love. Together, they became something magical, something bigger than the sum of their parts. But like every fairy tale, this one would come with its shadows. Before the world screamed their names, before the matching outfits and the television specials, Sonny and Cher were just two dreamers, hustling through small clubs and recording studios, fighting to be heard. Cher's deep contralto voice didn't sound like the sweet pop girls of the era, but Sonny crafted songs that made her difference and advantage. In 1965, the world finally heard it. "I Got You, Babe." It was more than a song. It was a revolution in 3 minutes. Their voices, one rough and nasal, the other rich and deep, wove together into a sound no one could ignore. It was the sound of love, of rebellion, of two outsiders telling the world, "We don't fit in, and we don't care." The record shot to #1. Suddenly, the girl who once felt invisible became the voice of a generation. Fans saw in Cher not just a singer, but a symbol. She wasn't polished, she wasn't perfect, but she was real. She embodied the dream that someone broken, someone abandoned, could still rise to unimaginable heights. But success never comes without shadows. Fame brought adoration, but also ridicule. Her fashion, fringe, bell-bottoms, fur vests, was mocked as much as it was celebrated. The press called them freaks, outsiders in a world that valued conformity. Yet, for every critic, there were millions of fans who adored her for daring to be different. From a childhood of abandonment to a #1 hit, Cher had transformed her pain into power. But what she didn't know yet was that fame would test her in ways even poverty never had. Because the higher you rise, the harder the fall, and Cher was only just beginning to fly. By the mid-1960s, Sonny and Cher were no longer just musicians. They were cultural shockwaves. Their hit, "I Got You, Babe," turned them into the unlikely darlings of America. In a sea of polished pop acts, they were raw, authentic, and strange. Sonny with his mustache and short stature, Cher towering beside him with her long raven hair and exotic features. They didn't look like anyone else, they didn't sound like anyone else, and that was exactly their magic. But fame, like love, is never simple. For a moment, they were unstoppable. They became icons of the counterculture, symbols of youthful rebellion. Cher's deep voice and fearless fashion made her a trendsetter, while Sonny's songwriting and business instincts kept them moving forward. They were partners, lovers, and dreamers bound together not just by music, but by survival. The 1960s were wild, chaotic, and unforgiving, but Sonny and Cher thrived in it. They weren't just making records, they were shaping style, culture, even identity. Millions of young people looked at them and thought, "If they can make it, maybe I can too." But with the adoration came the cruelty. The press mocked their style, calling Cher a half-breed and a freak. Her looks didn't fit the cookie-cutter image of blonde bombshells who ruled Hollywood. The racial undertones were vicious, and the sting was real. Yet Cher didn't shrink away. Instead, she leaned into it, wearing even bolder outfits, pushing fashion into places it had never gone before. Sequins, feathers, skin-bearing gowns designed by Bob Mackie, Cher turned herself into walking art. She became the girl who couldn't be ignored. By the early 70s, their music career had cooled, but television came calling. The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour became a phenomenon. Millions tuned in every week, not just for the music, but for the banter, the playful, sometimes biting exchanges between Sonny and Cher. She had a sharp wit, a fearless tongue, and audiences loved it. It was here, under the studio lights, that Cher transformed from singer to full-blown star. She wasn't just Sonny's partner anymore. She was the one people tuned in to see. The gowns, the jokes, the voice. It was a perfect storm of charisma. But behind the jokes and sequins, the cracks in their fairy tale began to show. Sonny was controlling, protective to the point of suffocation. To the public, they were a power couple. Behind closed doors, Cher was learning that love and imprisonment could look alarmingly alike. She once admitted she felt trapped. that Sonny saw her more as property than partner. He made the decisions, signed the contracts, and held the power, while she, the star, carried the weight of their success on her shoulders. The marriage, once built on trust and laughter, began to crumble. Cher, who had grown up abandoned and desperate for security, now felt abandoned in a different way, lonely inside the very marriage that made her famous. In 1974, the illusion shattered. Sonny and Cher divorced. The split wasn't just personal, it was professional. The duo who had built an empire together were suddenly two separate acts, and for Cher, the road ahead was terrifying. She was no longer just part of Sonny and Cher. She was simply Cher, and the world wasn't sure if she could stand on her own. For a time, the doubts seemed justified. The critics called her a joke, a novelty act, a fading star who had lost her shine. Without Sonny, they said, she would disappear. The tabloids mocked her love life, her fashion, her career choices. She was too strange, too loud, too different. But they underestimated Cher because reinvention was already in her blood. With Sonny gone, she turned pain into fuel. She poured herself into her solo music career, embracing styles and sounds that pushed boundaries. Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves in 1971, followed by Half-Breed and Dark Lady, weren't just songs, they were statements. They told the stories of outsiders, of people ridiculed and judged, of lives lived on the margins. They were Cher's life, disguised as music. The songs hit #1. She wasn't just surviving the split, she was dominating. She was no longer half of Sonny and Cher. She was Cher, period. Cher, period. Cher. Her voice, once mocked for being too deep, too unusual, now became her weapon. Her fashion, once ridiculed, now made her a queen of spectacle. The girl who never fit in was suddenly defining what in even meant. But fame's applause doesn't erase loneliness. Even as her career soared, Cher's personal life was filled with turbulence. Her love life became tabloid fodder, her every relationship dissected, her every heartbreak magnified. From David Geffen to Greg Allman, the rock star whose demons nearly destroyed them both, Cher's search for lasting love seemed cursed. Yet through it all, she kept standing, kept performing, kept reinventing. Every time life tried to bury her, she rose again, stronger, sharper, more dazzling than before. By the late 70s, Cher was more than a singer. She was a survivor. But the cruel truth of show business is this: survival is never enough. The disco wave crashed, and Cher, once again, found herself adrift. The world that had once adored her seemed ready to move on. Her music was mocked as outdated, her style called excessive. She was written off as a relic of the past, a star whose light had faded. But Cher was not done. Because when the world tried to erase her, she chose to rewrite herself. She would leave behind the glitz of television, the comfort of sequins, and the safety of pop. She would gamble everything on a new dream, one no one thought she could achieve. She would become an actress. And in doing so, Cher would prove once and for all that she was not just a singer, not just a survivor, but something far more rare. A phoenix, ready to rise from ashes. Yet again, by the late 1970s, Cher was a global name, but she was also trapped in a box. To millions, she was the singer with the glittering gowns, the half of a duo, the TV star with the biting wit. She was entertainment, yes, but not serious. And Cher hated that word, serious, because serious meant respect. And despite her fame, respect was the one thing she could not seem to win. The music critics mocked her, the television world pigeonholed her, and Hollywood saw her as nothing more than a sideshow. She was, in their eyes, too loud, too gaudy, too strange to be taken seriously. But Cher had been doubted her entire life. This was nothing new. When the world tried to box her in, she did the only thing she knew how to do. She broke the box apart. She left behind the comfort of television specials and pop records. And she took a gamble so insane most people thought it was career suicide. She decided to become a movie actress. Not just a celebrity cameo, not just fluff roles, but real, gritty, dramatic acting. Hollywood laughed. Casting directors rolled their eyes. She was Cher, the sequined diva, not Meryl Streep. What could she possibly bring to serious cinema? But Cher knew something they didn't. Pain is the best acting teacher of all. She started with small roles, parts no one expected her to take. In 1982, she stunned audiences in Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean. Critics were shocked. This wasn't Cher the pop star. This was Cher the actress, raw and vulnerable. She followed it with Silkwood in 1983, alongside Meryl Streep, playing a lesbian activist in a nuclear power scandal. It was a role dripping with grit and humanity, and Cher delivered it with quiet, devastating power. She was nominated for an Academy Award. The laughter stopped, but Cher wasn't done. She threw herself into acting with the same ferocity she had poured into music. By the mid-'80s, she was everywhere. Mask in 1985, The Witches of Eastwick in 1987, and then the crown jewel, Moonstruck in 1987. In Moonstruck, she played Loretta Castorini, a widowed Italian-American woman caught in a whirlwind of love, doubt, and family chaos. It was a performance both funny and heartbreaking, glamorous yet grounded. She was luminous, but more importantly, she was real. And in 1988, the Academy handed her the Golden Statue for Best Actress. Cher had done the impossible. The girl who dropped out of high school, the singer mocked for her voice, the TV star ridiculed for her costumes, the outsider who never belonged, was now standing at the pinnacle of Hollywood, holding an Oscar in her hand. It was the ultimate rebirth. And Cher, being Cher, made sure the moment was unforgettable. She accepted the award in a Bob Mackie gown that defied every standard of serious Hollywood fashion. A bejeweled black outfit with a towering feathered headdress. Critics gasped, some horrified, some in awe. But it was pure Cher. Defiance wrapped in sequins. It was her way of saying, I don't need to fit your mold to be the best. I am the mold. Yet, as always, with every triumph came another storm. The 1990s weren't kind to Cher. The music world shifted again, leaving her disco pop records behind. The film roles dried up, and for a time, she drifted. Her health took blows, her relationships fractured, and the tabloids circled like vultures. The woman who once seemed invincible was now being written off yet again, a fallen star from another era. But Cher had a weapon no one could ever take from her: the art of reinvention. When the industry tried to bury her, she reinvented herself not with ballads, not with films, but with something no one saw coming: dance music. In 1998, Cher released Believe. It wasn't just a song, it was a revolution. With its pulsating beat and pioneering use of auto-tune, it sounded like the future. And when Cher sang the line, "Do you believe in life after love?" the world stopped and listened. It was her anthem, her declaration, her rebirth. She wasn't just singing about heartbreak, she was singing about her life. Every loss, every betrayal, every doubt, answered with one resounding yes. The song exploded worldwide, topping charts in over 20 countries. At 52 years old, an age when most female pop stars were considered finished, Cher was leading dance floors packed with teenagers. She was older than almost everyone else in the charts, but she wasn't following them. She was leading them. Believe sold over 11 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling singles of all time. It won a Grammy, cemented her as an eternal force in pop culture, and silenced anyone who ever thought she was over. She wasn't just back, she was bigger than ever. But for Cher, success was always balanced by shadows. Behind the dazzling performances and sold-out tours, she carried personal wounds. She endured health struggles, failed relationships, and the unbearable pain of losing Sonny in 1998, when he died in a skiing accident. The man who had once defined her, loved her, controlled her, betrayed her, and helped her become who she was gone. And Cher, despite everything they had endured, mourned him deeply. The world saw her tears as she delivered the eulogy at his funeral. It was raw, it was human, and it reminded everyone that beneath the sequins and feathers, Cher was still Sherilyn, the little girl who had once just wanted to be loved and never left behind. But if life had taught her anything, it was this: grief may wound, but it cannot kill the fire inside her. Cher turned her heartbreak into strength once again, proving to the world that she wasn't just surviving life. She was shaping it into legend, and the 2000s would show that Cher's story was far from finished. Because for Cher, every ending was just another beginning. The turn of the millennium was a time when most artists from the 60s and 70s had faded into nostalgia, their voices preserved in vinyl and memory. But Cher was never most artists. While others slowed down, Cher set her sights on a new empire: live performance. In 2002, she launched her living proof, the Farewell Tour. The title alone carried a weight of finality, as if she was saying goodbye to the stage forever. But Cher doesn't do goodbyes. She does spectacles. The tour became one of the highest-grossing ever for a female artist, spanning more than 300 shows across 5 continents. Night after night, fans filled arenas to see her rise like a goddess from the stage, draped in sequins and feathers, delivering her anthems with the same fire as decades before. At an age when the industry tried to dismiss women, Cher was rewriting the rules again. She wasn't fading away gracefully. She was conquering. But offstage, life was far less forgiving. Cher's relationships continued to fracture, often played out under the blinding glare of the tabloids. She raised 2 children, Chaz Bono and Elijah Blue Allman, each with their own struggles and complicated relationships with fame, identity, and their mother. Cher loved them fiercely, but motherhood was not simple. She admitted that her career often stole time from her children, that her drive to survive and succeed sometimes left wounds she could never fully heal. Her bond with Chaz, especially, was tested and remade as Chaz transitioned and faced intense public scrutiny. Cher, who had built her career on defying norms, now found herself learning, struggling, and ultimately embracing her child's journey with the same unconditional love she had fought for her whole life. And then came the silence of loss once again. Sonny Bono's death in 1998 had cracked something deep inside her, but as the years passed, the grief lingered like a shadow. Despite their bitter divorce, Sonny had been her first great love, her partner in survival, the man who believed in her when no one else did. Losing him was like losing a part of her history, a part of herself. At his funeral, Cher's eulogy cut through the noise of celebrity and tabloids and reminded the world of their humanity. With tears streaming down her face, she spoke not as Cher, the goddess of reinvention, but as Sherilyn, the girl who had once been saved by Sonny's belief. The grief was undeniable and it stayed with her, but grief, as always, became her fuel. The 2000s turned Cher into something more than a singer or actress. She became a living legend. Her Las Vegas residencies at Caesar's Palace drew millions, transforming the city into her kingdom. She wasn't just performing songs, she was performing survival itself. Every sequin, every feather, every note was a testament that time could not touch her. The costumes became more outrageous, the sets more spectacular. She appeared on stage like a warrior queen, descending from the heavens, defying gravity, age, and expectation. Fans didn't just come to hear the music, they came to witness resilience incarnate. And then, in 2013, at 67 years old, she released Closer to the Truth, her first studio album in over a decade. The lead single, Woman's World, was not just a dance track, it was a manifesto. She sang not for the young, but for anyone who had ever been told their time was over. Because Cher knew that time was her greatest adversary, and she refused to let it win. Still, beneath the lights and the glitter, she admitted to feeling the weight of loneliness. In interviews, she confessed that after the shows ended, after the applause faded, she often went home alone. Her lovers had come and gone, her marriages failed, her children grown. The world saw an icon draped in sequins, but behind the curtain was a woman who had spent a lifetime learning how to live with solitude. Cher has always been brutally honest, sometimes to the point of shock. She once quipped, "Men are not a necessity. They're like dessert." It was a line that became legend, but behind the humor was a truth carved from pain. She had learned not to rely on anyone, because everyone she had loved had either left or been taken away. But solitude never meant weakness. Cher turned her independence into her crown. While other stars faded into nostalgia acts, she stood tall, a woman in her 70s still headlining arenas, still topping charts, still shaping culture. She became proof that reinvention was not a phase, but a way of life. And in 2018, when most artists her age were enjoying quiet retirements, Cher did what no one expected. She reinvented herself again. She starred in Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, dazzling a new generation who barely knew her history. She released Dancing Queen, an entire album of ABBA covers, which charted worldwide and reminded everyone that Cher could step into any era, any genre, and make it her own. From the child abandoned by her father, to the young girl mocked for her voice, to the diva ridiculed for her costumes, Cher had now become untouchable. Not because she never fell, but because she always rose. Her life was no longer just her own. It was a mirror for anyone who had ever been underestimated, ridiculed, or left behind. She was proof that survival could be art, and reinvention could be immortality. But Cher's story still had one more act to unfold. The act where she would confront time itself and ask the question that had haunted her all her life. How do you remain eternal in a world that forgets so easily? Cher was never just an icon. Behind the dazzling lights and costumes, she was a mother navigating one of the most difficult balancing acts any woman could face. Being the world's biggest star while raising children under the harshest spotlight imaginable. Her first child, Chaz Bono, was born in 1969 during the height of the Sonny and Cher frenzy. For most families, a baby brings peace and joy. For Cher, motherhood came with chaos and headlines. Paparazzi swarmed, fans speculated, and every decision she made as a parent was criticized. Cher admitted years later that she wasn't always the perfect mother. How could she be when the world constantly demanded her presence on stage, in studios, and on screens? But one thing remained certain. She loved her children fiercely. Her relationship with Chaz became one of the most publicized and controversial parts of her personal life. When Chaz came out as transgender in the 2000s, the world turned its eyes to Cher, waiting for her reaction. At first, she struggled. She admitted she was confused, scared, and didn't understand. But unlike many parents, Cher never walked away. She educated herself, she asked questions, she learned. Most importantly, she chose love over judgment. That decision, raw, painful, human, cemented Cher not just as an icon, but as a mother who grew alongside her child, her second son. Elijah Blue, born from her marriage to rock guitarist Greg Allman, carried his own struggles. Addiction, distance, and pain shadowed their relationship. Cher, who had faced her own battles with love and heartbreak, found herself helpless at times, watching her child fall. Yet, even when her relationships with her sons were strained, Cher's love never dimmed. She once confessed, "Being a mother was harder than being a star. I could control a stage, but I couldn't control life." Behind the wigs, the glitter, and the stardom, Cher was human. And maybe that's why we love her even more. Fame is intoxicating, but it can also be isolating. After Sonny's tragic death in 1998, Cher performed a tribute at his funeral that left the world in tears. Her voice cracked, her body trembled, but her words carried a truth only she could speak. Despite their battles, Sonny had been the love of her life, her anchor and her beginning. Losing him felt like losing a part of herself. Yet Cher didn't let grief silence her. Instead, she transformed it into power. She took her pain to the stage, to the studio, to the big screen. Her 1998 hit, Believe, wasn't just a song, it was a statement. It became an anthem of survival, reinvention, and self-empowerment. With its groundbreaking auto-tune effect, the track not only changed music forever, but also reintroduced Cher to a whole new generation. But beyond the music, Cher's resilience lay in her defiance. Hollywood had told her she was too old, too strange, too difficult. Critics said her career would die in the 1970s, then again in the 1980s, and once more in the 1990s. Yet every time, Cher proved them wrong. Loneliness was her shadow. Lovers came and went, friends betrayed her, age crept in. But when the world doubted her, Cher's answer was always the same. She stood taller, louder, and prouder. Most stars fade with time. Cher refused. Even in her 70s, she was selling out arenas, headlining tours, and dancing with the same fire she had in her 20s. She embraced new generations, collaborating with artists half her age, appearing in films like Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and even dominating social media with her sharp, witty, unfiltered tweets. Unlike many celebrities, Cher never pretended to be untouchable. She shared her fears, her insecurities, and her struggles with aging openly. She became a symbol not of perfection, but of authenticity. And when critics called her too old for sequins and wigs, Cher laughed. She once said, "I've always been old enough to know better, but young enough to do it anyway." That spirit, the refusal to be boxed in by rules, age, or expectations, is what makes Cher eternal. Cher is more than a singer, more than an actress, more than an entertainer. She is a survivor, a rebel, a mother, and a fighter. Her story is proof that pain and loss do not define us. What defines us is how we rise from them. She was abandoned as a child, underestimated as an artist, mocked by critics, and broken by loss. Yet she never stopped. She reinvented herself more times than any other performer in history, not just in music, but in spirit. For every woman told she's too old, Cher is the answer. For every artist told they don't fit the mold, Cher is the proof. For every person struggling to rise from heartbreak, Cher is the hope. And that's why Cher isn't just a star. She's a constellation, a light that refuses to burn out. Long after the stages go dark, after the sequins lose their shine, her story will continue to inspire. Because Cher is not just about believing in life after love. She is about believing in life, period. Life, period.